everybody, this is AJ, and this is a Monsterology video. If you're new to my Monsterology videos, this is not where I discuss a specific monster from the 5th edition monster manual. Rather, I talk about an environment or an entire category of monsters. And today, I'm going to be talking about constructs, artificial life forms, in the context of Dungeons and Dragons. So in the 5th edition monster manual, it talks about the creation process of the golem. Golems, their mythology goes back to Jewish folklore, where the golem was created in a holy ritual and infused with life to protect people. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's a body which is constructed in a very specific manner, and then it is animated with a tiny fragment of an earth elemental, so the living spirit of an extra-dimensional being that obeys different physical laws, that is devoid of intelligence. It's basically just like the elemental equivalent of a cockroach that is summoned and used as the motivational force, the life force, to animate inert matter. Elementals, of course, are an energy being that uses matter around it as its body. So their natural way of doing things is to infuse themselves into inert material and animate it as if it was their own body. So they're actually capable of moving through material as an immaterial being. It's like if you had some sort of a horror movie where a spirit can possess bodies, go from one body to another. Same sort of thing. Elementals do that with the element that they're a part of. And in the case of golems, that's used as a means of animating inert material that you've crafted to be a servant. So it's a containment vessel that you've programmed that the elemental can drive in a certain way that it's commanded to. Of course, this is greatly expanded on in the many years, many decades that Dungeons and Dragons has been around. So you've got clay golems, flesh golems, iron golems, and stone golems, which are described in the monster manual, and they all have their own specific traits and things. But it goes much wider than that. So you have you've got animated objects, you've got inevitables that are created by primordials or gods. You've got shield guardians, automatons, bogans, which are small nature servants created by druids. They're like a homunculus, but they're a direct extension of their creator, sort of bound to their life force. The bogan basically looks like a vaguely humanoid mound of compost, and the homunculus looks like a little imp with fairly useless wings, and it has to stay within a certain range of its creator. The homunculus is bound to its creator by the fact that they share the same life force. So if the creator is killed, the homunculus instantly dies, and if the homunculus is destroyed, the creator feels great pain and torment as they are also injured. And the homunculus, although it can't talk, it shares all of the memories and knowledge of its creator, so it's like an extension of that person, and can see and do things through its creator can see through its eyes and things. And so they use them as companions and guardians of their lairs and things like that. The bronze serpent is a golem-like big snake thing that's often seen in tropical islands and such, guardians of temples, and they appear as 20-foot-long serpents made of articulated bronze rings with big fangs and electricity instead of venom. The cadaver collector is from the Monster Manual 3, and they're giant stone golems with jagged metal armor plates, and they collect cadavers, dead bodies on battlegrounds, and they're disgusting and freaky. Then you got clockwork horrors, dread guards, helmed horrors, which are just an animating spirit which animates a suit of plate mail, much like an animated sword, except it's an articulated humanoid form. You've got retrievers, which are ancient, horrific bounty hunters of the hells. You've got zodars, which are humanoid, medium-sized, very, very powerful, enigmatic fighters that they prefer to just fight without weapons and beat the hell out of their opponents, who they choose for their own inexplicable reasons. They're about 5 feet tall, look like ornate black suits of armor with a life of their own, and they are capable of speaking, though they hardly ever do. And they're from, where are they from? They're chaotic neutral, I know that. I'll have to look those guys up. So, yeah, they've been around for a very long time, and it's an interesting thing because, and of course the Warforged. I'll talk about the Warforged in a second. So, in this, you'll have craftspeople who are contracted by a wizard or a sorcerer or a cleric or some other intelligent person who's willing to enact this ritual to create this thing for whatever reason. And the craftspeople are making this thing to exacting designs. It may not actually be the wizard that makes this at all. And in fact, it makes sense that a wizard wouldn't be the person to make this thing because they spend most of their time with their nose buried in ancient books, deciphering languages and things and trying to understand the code of whoever they're reading the spell book of. I mean, if you took all the doodles and things like that that you've written and say you were researching things and writing notes to yourself, a spell book is very much like that, I would imagine. So a wizard's spellbook would be almost indecipherable at first glance. You'd be looking at a big collection of bits of information, almost like homework notes or an exam crib sheet or something like that, where it's highlights of information and diagrams and things like that, which are shorthand for something which is much more complicated. So just studying a spellbook may not be enough. You'd need to know what the spellbook is actually referencing. So you'd need to understand what this wizard has learned and go and read the original text yourself, and then you'd be able to understand what innovations that wizard has made and what these symbols and cliff notes are alluding to in the spellbook, which allow the wizard to remember the specific mental pathways that the mental gymnastics they need to do in order to exert their will in a specific way on very, very dangerous energies. So they don't have time to worry about the minutiae of carpentry, ironwork, coppersmithing, metal and goldsmithing, fluxes, welding, cogs, gears, pulleys, physics, this sort of thing. They need craftspeople to make these things for them. So it's going to be a complicated process. In the Dungeons & Dragons world, making a golem is as complicated as making a F-16 fighter jet in many ways. You need superior metals and metallurgy and alchemy and things like that. It's as complicated as making a flintlock rifle. And there's going to be few and far between are the craftspeople who are actually capable of doing this. It's not like you can go up to the village blacksmith who's been making horseshoes from, which he learned how to do from Master Fanion because he couldn't get into the army, and tell him to construct an iron golem or a shield golem, with articulated finger joints. It's a tall order. So you got to really think about where this fits in your campaign world. Typically, golems are either going to be a very recent creation, and there'll be a very good reason why they've been made, or they will be fairly ancient, a legacy of something which happened a long time ago, and where there was a centre of civilization, a centre of technology, where craftspeople of sufficient skill were able to actually do this. And then, of course, you'll have the lore of actually summoning an elemental force into the material world, or capturing one that is already existing there, and directing it to the wizard's or sorcerer or cleric's will. Of course, warlocks may also be able to do this at the behest of whatever power is granting their supernatural abilities. It could be the emanations of a dark star or some such thing which is channeled through the warlock and compels them as part of their contract, their pact, to do such a thing, to construct a vessel that this power may inhabit so that it may act on the mortal plane directly and not have to rely on the will of the warlock doing exactly what the power wants it to do. It may be part of the pact that it actually has to do something like this, in which case the construct may not actually be under the warlock's control at all. It may be the animating force of itself. Then we get onto the Warforged and the Inevitables and other sort of advanced constructs that are artificially created. However, they are self-directing, independent beings capable of independent thought. Star Wars droids, for instance, are an interesting philosophical argument. You could argue that they are constructs for sure. You see clearly that C-3PO, for instance, has a mechanical brain that's working, and he's basically just a collection of wires and circuits. But he's clearly self-directing and intelligent and has his own emotional matrix. So is he emulating emotions, or is he capable of feeling things? They seem to have a self-preservation where they don't want to have their memory wiped, for instance, so they have a sense of self or preservation. Or perhaps it's just they have orders or instructions or programs that they're running that would be countermined by having the memory wiped. So they have a contingency in there that says if you have something which is not yet resolved, an order which a human has given you, you must preserve your intelligence, preserve your memory until that task is resolved. So maybe that's their motivation for avoiding getting mind wiped for so long. But otherwise, constructs who are an emulation of intelligence perhaps don't have that self-preservation, and they're just really emulating emotions. They seem to have instinctual desires which we would attribute as a survival instinct or some such, but really they're just following instructions, and they don't consider, they don't worry about things, they just follow a set path, a program, algorithms. Everything that they do is an inevitable outcome, and they would do the same thing every single time given the same stimulus. So there's that. Warforged and Inevitables, on the other hand, don't. They have a level of chaos in their thinking. There's a certain alchemical nature to a Warforged intelligences. They have organic parts as part of their physical construction. Their animating force is mysterious. We don't. It's never really specifically said what fundamental thing is animating them. Is it an elemental? I don't think so. I think it's some sort of spiritual being which has been stripped of any memory of its past life. So a Warforged, in fact, is a soul, or has some sort of a soul. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to use magic and things like that. I don't know. It seems logical enough to me. Inevitables were created by gods, or celestial beings, or really, really powerful primal beings at the start of creation of the universe. So they are artificial constructs, but the basic foundation of what they are is almost like a test case of how to construct an organic body. So they're just as complicated as an organic being, except they don't follow they don't have the same frailties and things like that. In Dungeons and Dragons, typically constructs will lack functional internal organs, and the animating force doesn't require a biological system to support it. So they're immune to critical hits and rogue sneak attacks and things like that. You could argue that rogue sneak attack is not in fact representative of it hitting an organ per se, but rather the ability to get underneath the defences, such as the ability to shove a sharp dagger into the unprotected part underneath an arm or between the leg or something like that. And perhaps they have the ability to shove it into a particularly sensitive joint or a network of crossed over conduits of alchemical fluids in a Warforged, and could pull off some sort of a sneak attack. It's up to you. The rules as written generally give constructs protection against that sort of thing. Plus, they typically don't have any aversion to poisons. They're not subject to exhaustion or fatigue. Diseases, of course, don't work. And a lot of magical special effects don't work on them either. Warforged and things that are self-directing are subject to charm effects, just like anything else, although they don't need to sleep, therefore they don't dream, therefore they have some different mental mechanism. They probably don't have a subconscious. They have some other method of generating their consciousness. So that's an interesting thing. Yeah, so there's a lot of different constructs to talk about. I mean, you could talk about animated objects for sure. I had a very interesting conversation with somebody the other day about an animated dagger with a personality of a pimp, a murderous pimp, and that was a great conversation, and certainly something I'm going to insert into my game at some point. Animated objects with a personality. So even if it's an artificial personality, so if you had a mentalist who is creating an artificial ego construct, so imagine that they are creating a fragment of their intelligence. They created a role play of such intricacy and self-propelling, self-fueling convincement. Like, imagine you're role-playing a character and you get into character so much that it takes on a life of its own. Imagine a scion has the ability to partition that off, invest it with psychic energy, tie it into a construct, infuse it with some sort of other energy source to keep that energy going, and then you've got an intelligent weapon which is a personality into and of itself, except it's a little bit two-dimensional. It's a little bit vague on the details. It's a very good, strong personality type, but it doesn't have a lot of other motivations to it. It's a cliche of itself. It's a caricature that they've created for a reason. And if you're animating an object, you would want that caricature to be a motivation to get that object to do exactly what you want it to do. So if you're creating a guardian, you'd want a compulsive, obsessive, blunt, abrupt, practical, stubborn personality that is convinced that what it's doing is absolutely right. And there's nothing that can convince it to do otherwise, unless it's its creator telling it to do something else. Now you put that into, if you take that away from its environment, where it was set up to guard, and put it somewhere where it can't get back to where it was, what is that personality going to do? Here it is, an immortal object, motivated by a desire it can't fulfill, trying to find its way in the world. That's a big ask, and it's an interesting personality to roleplay or interact with. So animated objects can for sure be very interesting. Guardian type objects, helmed horrors, that sort of thing, they're the most common forms of constructs, and really that's the best motivation for making them. Warforged and other forms, the cadaver, the retriever and cadaver collector, clockwork horrors, other sort of attack forms or weapons of engines of destruction, they're terrifying because they just won't stop. They basically are the Terminator. And of course they don't have to have a lot of personality there. They are predatory. They're hunters. They're motivated by the desire to get the job done, to find their target and neutralize it, or capture it, retrieve it, and take it back to where it started. So particularly in the case of something like a retriever, so it's where are they from? They're from the first edition Fiend Folio, and they're also in the 4th edition, Monster Manual 2, 2009. So it's a construct in the 3rd edition, although some prior sources have it as a demon, and it basically looks like a giant metallic spider with the body of an ox and 8 14-foot long legs. The back of its head and its head are interlaced with dozens of glossy metal plates in a sort of a jagged fashion, and it's black, and it's got 6 eyes that glow, and it's got big mandibles, and it's a terrifying thing. So they're constructed typically by evil mages, warlords, or demons would get them constructed as well, to find, capture, and recapture lost or desired objects, or runaway slaves, or wanted criminals and such. And they do that with terrifying, unerring accuracy. So they've got to have some sort of highly tuned senses. And if you can figure out what it's latched onto, you can probably get away from them, because they're going to follow that trail until it runs cold, and then follow some sort of program to search around until they latch onto something else and follow that trail. But yeah, that's they're having one of these things after you is fairly terrifying, because it's an unaligned creature. It doesn't have motivations. It's following a program, and it's terrifying in that because they won't stop. You can't bargain them out of it. You can't do anything short of destroying them or disabling them to stop them coming after you. So yeah, you can run a sort of a Terminator storyline in that regard. Of course, that's all sort of constructs that are made by intelligent beings with intelligence that we understand. You can have other forms of construct which actually take on an entirely different aspect. So like I mentioned before, entities that can possess living beings can use them as vehicles, which is horrific when you think of something which can appear in the body of somebody that you know, trust, or love, and is now using it as an engine of destruction to come after you, kill you, or subvert you, or infiltrate. like a shape changer. So yeah, lots and lots of story options there, and I guess I'll be covering a few more constructs specifically in the game, and the monster manual. We've got the homunculus and the golems in there, which I'll be covering coming up. Thanks for listening, everybody. It'll be a while until my next Monsterology video. If you like this sort of video, let me know in the comment section down below.